Hello and welcome again to one of Satric's virtual roundtable video series. Today we're going to be talking about the advantages of in-depth interviews. For those of you who may not know, Satric Solutions is a professional services consulting firm, and we're diligently working for our clients to get them rich, candid results they need from prospects, current customers, and even former customers to ensure the decisions and investments that they're making will have a material impact on the customer experience. My name is Jonathan Beretta. I'm Vice President of Client Services at Satric Solutions. And with me, Christian.
I'm Christian Muma. I'm Senior Director of Customer Insights.
And Christian and I have been here with Satric Solutions both for over 7 years now. And one of the things that we see our clients focusing on mainly are surveys, preferably online, in-app type surveys. But one area that we're working on getting our clients to look at more, and across industries, B2B leaders are looking at more often lately, given the current environment, are in-depth interviews. You know, each approach has different ways of eliciting feedback from the customers, but in-depth interviews are an interesting one. For surveys, you're getting a broad spectrum of verbatim feedback from individuals, but you're not focusing on it on any particular group. Whereas customer advisory boards, you are focusing in on specific thought leaders, perhaps within the industry, to get information on challenges they're facing, maybe with products and services that you offer. But in-depth interviews kind of fits in the middle. It gets you all of that information, but from a broader audience, so you can tackle different segments and different groups, maybe different personas within those groups of your customers, prospects, and former customers. So when you think about it that way, one of the big things is what is it that we can really elicit from in-depth interviews? You know, we have an advanced team here that has been forged over 40 years of experience that are conducting these types of interviews, and we'll get into the different types in a few minutes that we conduct. But Christian, you know, based on your experience and the team's experience, what kind of things are we able to gather and elicit from those interviewees?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the great thing about interviews is there's almost no end to what intelligence you can gather from those interviews. But typically what we see with our clients, starting the graphic on the left-hand side, is we can elicit feedback around the perceptions of our client account and see what their customers and what the market thinks about them. Then thinking about more sales, we can evaluate the decision-making criteria that VPs, C-suite are making, or the evaluation teams about selecting a particular vendor. Then, you could also talk to them about, with their customers, about the successes, what makes their engagement successful and how can they replicate that with the rest of their engagements. And then back over to more sales lens, you can also gather competitive insight. What are your, what's the competition doing in the market? Well, is it being well received? Are they releasing features, functionality that's grabbing a lot of attention? Is another common, type of feedback that we can grab. And so, Jonathan, maybe you could take us into brand loyalty.
Yeah, I mean, it ties directly into it, right? If you're talking to individuals and they're saying, I've got 3 competitors contacting me every day, giving me different options or breaks on certain things, loyalty is going to keep them with you as opposed to jumping ship on one of those aspects. And then, from there, you've got pain points. What are the issues? The famous thing, one mistake is going to take 10 good interactions before that's forgotten in those types of situations. And then the likely to renew ties into all of that, right? Are they going to stick with you and keep moving forward? So this is just some of the examples to help level set everyone as the types of things that we can really get in depth with, if you'll forgive the pun, on these interviews. So let's start talking about the advantages to these interviews that go beyond the types of things we've talked about, surveys and client advisory boards and other things. What are the advantages specifically for these? How do you make it personal with the individual? You really work on becoming a skilled interviewer in a couple of different ways. One is active listening, really listening to what they're saying, listening for even pauses or changes in tone, and communicating with them, opening up and getting them to open up on whatever it is you're trying to get candid feedback from. Sometimes those pauses, sometimes those changes in tones could lead you to ask some additional questions from that individual that you would never get in a survey or in a public forum where there's more than 2 people on the call on a client advisory board. So it's really helpful in that way. IDIs can also be very flexible. So Christian, if you'd like to give some examples there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, in my mind and experience, this is one of the top advantages of doing an interview program. A lot of times when you're designing an online survey questionnaire, you're only confined to that template, the quantitative and the qualitative questions that you're posing to the respondents. Whereas IDIs, particularly when you have a skilled interviewer, you can listen to cues and ask good follow-up questions. Sometimes I've had it, Jonathan, where I jump in a call and the person I'm interviewing, it's actually apparent that they don't necessarily have the knowledge that pertains to the questionnaire. However, once I ask a few questions and get an idea of what they do know, I can create a whole new line of question right there on the spot. So I know that's one thing that our clients really appreciate. Jonathan, how about you take us through a little bit of the context?
It ties directly in, Christian, what you were just talking about. That flexibility ties into the context. It's really listening to what the individual is saying and then adapt and ask clarifying questions. So, they may say a couple of things that happened with an event 3 weeks earlier, as an example. Don't really remember it well. If they've got emails, if they've got communications that they can look at, ask them, hey, can you quickly take a look at that? And then through that process, go with them, and it kind of helps them remember what happened, get much more detail so that you can feed that back to the client as to what happened and maybe remedy that or use that as a training feature going forward. It's just one example of a context. Maybe it's contextual around some of the sales techniques a competitor is using, or it could be the real reasons why someone left your organization's product or services. All of those things play a real vital role that we can utilize to get a much better picture from that interviewee. So, as I'm kind of alluding to here, Christian, it gives us a whole contextual picture. Why don't you kind of go into that in a little bit more detail as an example you might have?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it really just, you can tie up all the loose ends within one 20-minute phone call. It's really nice. A lot of times we see with online surveys is it requires a follow-up call, closing a loop. Of course, that's all well and good, and a lot of online surveys are designed to do just that. But particularly in like a sales environment, if you're trying to evaluate why somebody won or lost an engagement, really when you get on the phone call, you can tie into the thought process of the decision maker. Why were they originally connecting with these vendors? What was driving their decision? What when they started receiving the sales calls or the responses to the RFP, what criteria or what things were the competitors putting in that response that was grabbing their attention and that would actually get them the meeting. And then of course comes pitch meetings and then the contract price. I mean, really it's everything. It just paints that whole picture. So in one interview, you understand top to bottom why they were initially searching for a vendor, what resonated with them in the response to the RFPs, the pitch calls, and then ultimately from a contractual standpoint, what were some of the things that they were considering in their final decision.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then think about even beyond that as you build out your world-class CX program, right? You've got this information that's this great qualitative feedback. Now tie it back to maybe a relationship survey that this client took 6 months ago. Were they a detractor? What comments could you use from that to red flag to look at other customers in the future and maybe avoid something like that?
Absolutely.
So, how do we use these? In what types of programs? We've alluded to that throughout our discussion so far. But as we move to the next slide, these are some examples of when in-depth interviews would be really good to use. And when we start with the one on the top left, sales win-loss, what worked in your company's favor? What worked against you? What didn't factor into the final decision that you thought maybe was important? Did it literally come down to one of the competitors was in the same city as that potential prospect and your offices weren't? Or was it one particular meeting where someone wasn't prepared or didn't listen to the C-suite as to what they wanted that presentation to be? All of those things can really be dived into deeply and get good feedback from in an in-depth interview. So Christian, what about customer satisfaction type scenarios?
Typically what we see with our clients is they will do this in congruently with an online survey. A lot of times we call them VIP interviews internally, but really it's just getting on the phone with our um, client's main stakeholder, and really trying to get that deep dive of everything. What's going well in the engagement, what's not so much, what type of maybe product roadmap features that they'd like to see released. It's really, in particular too, it's really nice to tie in our analysis once we close an online survey. Really just, again, we're talking about context here.
Mm-hmm.
It really paints that big picture and ties everything together. And leveraging in-depth interviews to measure customer satisfaction is certainly well and good, but then you can also take it a step further and measure the perception that your customers have of you against the rest of the market. We have one client in particular where it's not uncommon for their competitors to be used by their customers for a few different engagements within the organization. So recently, a project we conducted, we were able to gain that insight about how our client performs and is perceived against the rest of the other companies their client is using. And, Jonathan, and maybe you could talk to us about customer defection, in the unfortunate event when, somebody decides to leave our client.
Yeah, I mean, it ties directly into it. What is it about the churn or the defection, if you will, that they can learn from? Is there an expectation gap that started all the way back from sales to the actual services that were done? Did a competitor's pitch resonate with them more? All of these things factor into it, and identifying those trends, not one-offs, but the trends with different groups or segments that have defected, really helps you build a better CX program over time. I know, Christian, you and I work hard with the team to really get them to ask questions in this area that goes beyond, well, they were just too expensive. Or, I had too much turnover in my customer success or customer experience person. What was it beyond that? And we have a number of examples for clients that we've worked with where it turns out it wasn't necessarily a personality clash with the customer service person. It was literally that a CEO or a COO within the organization had a relationship with a competitor and made a personal decision to go with that individual rather than this company.
If I may add, Jonathan,
Yeah.
as much as how painful these calls can be to listen to, one of my favorite things to grab from them is, working with our client and what their internal perceptions of why their client left them, and then comparing it to what was said in the interview. I think it really just, goes to show how there's a conflicting picture, being shown with our customer and the vendor that's leaving them.
Yeah. It's always more than just a one or two sentence in a drop-down menu in a CRM for somebody as to why they left the organization. Christian, what about market research and competitive intelligence? This is one of the more interesting and fun areas within Satrix that we get to work on.
It is, yeah. And a lot of times there's not necessarily, one particular roadmap for us to follow. I mean, really, these become very tailored to what our clients want. And the team always looks forward to doing these market research, competitive intelligence studies. There's always a lot of, fun and creative, thinking that goes into them.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think that really hits on the fact that, these in-depth interviews reveal the most when they are conducted by experienced researchers, because it takes careful planning to know what questions to ask and really how to ask them, when to probe further on a topic and when to, park it and move on. Capturing all the nuances from an interview takes a lot of work and a lot of interviewing skill set over time that we've worked with the team on. But the journey, doesn't really end with just the interview. Once the feedback's collected, that's when it needs to be analyzed. Looking for common themes, translated into action opportunities and recommendations for our clients. And we work very hard on that, and we're very flexible in the ways that we provide that information to them to make it most usable for them. The in-depth interviews are just the beginning of the path to really have a better understanding of your customers, stakeholders, potential buyers, and why you may lose customers in the future. So as we go to the next slide, to learn more about in-depth interviews, we just kind of covered a brief aspect here, and we haven't even talked about how to ask questions and what types of questions to ask. That's going to be another video in our video series down the road. But for today, we have an article that you can use your mobile phone, take a picture of that QR code, it'll take you to the link that goes into more depth of what we've just briefly talked about and covered today. But in the meantime, however, we'd like to give you a free offer for watching the video. If you're interested in exploring more with us, how in-depth interviews can deliver value for your CX program, Christian and I are making ourselves available for exclusive office hours. For our viewers interested in learning more about the topic, you can send us a note to our website, contact Christian or myself or the company on LinkedIn. And we're happy to schedule a call and answer any questions you may have. So thanks, Christian, for your time today.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yep. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.